my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. So today I am quilting block number 2, our Patchwork Mosaic, on my Longarm, and I have a very different set of designs to stitch for you today. So let's jump on the machine. I'll show you how I'm quilting this block in quarters. So here's our Patchwork Mosaic block on the Longarm frame, and I really wanted to emphasize this diamond shape within the block, this beautiful area created by those quarter square triangles. But I knew if I tried to stitch that diamond shape, I would run out of space. I don't have enough room in my frame in order to quilt that in one continuous line. So my solution is to stitch this in 1/4 at a time, and I've already done this. Basically, I'm breaking up the lines and going back and forth. I'm going to call this broken lines. I think it's a pretty cool design, and you just stitch back and forth across, and it's basically echo ditching. As I come close over here, I'm stopping a 1/2 of an inch away. Same thing over here, I'm stopping a 1/2 of an inch away from those seam lines. And so I'm still getting that nice angle, that diagonal line, but I'm not having to break thread. I only broke thread one time to go from here to there. So I'm going to try and do this exact same design again. I don't know if I'll be able to do the exact same thing, but we'll try. So first thing I did was I laid out some 1/4 inch blue masking tape here. This is painter's tape. And I lined this up so it's right in line with that seam line running down the middle of the block. And this is just a guideline. I find that it's really easy to overshoot these lines because it's just a busy block. I did another piece right here. This is lined up on the edge of that seam line as well. And then I've dropped my needle down exactly 3/4 inch away from that line. And like I said, I'm going to aim to make this identical to the other one, but I don't think it's a big deal if they were different. I think each quarter, as long as you're basically stitching the same thing, and that is randomly spaced lines and then echo ditching, I don't think that you have to really worry so much about the exact spacing of this. I think you can play around with it. So here I'm going to go, basically this is echo ditching. The edge of the ruler is lined up right with that seam line on the block. I'm going to go down. This time what I'm going to do, and here you can see I started right on that painter's tape, and that's where I like to start. But this time I'm going to come down, and as I stitch, I'm going to stop on the edge of my foot. This is my ruler foot on the machine. I'm going to stop when the edge of the ruler foot comes in contact with the painter's tape. That lets me know I'm going to do exactly a 1/2 of an inch spacing from the seam line to the needle. Okay, now I'm coming over and kind of eyeballing what I did before over here. I think I'm going to stitch to the seam line right there. So what I'm doing is stopping and checking what I did before and trying to match it. Now this might not end up working when I advance the quilt through the machine, because of course I won't have it as a reference anymore, but I think this is going to work just fine. So here we go. Edge of the foot is coming in contact with that painter's tape again. That looks good. Line that up, and now let me eyeball where did I stop before. And it looks like I stopped, let's see here, that would be this line somewhere in the middle here. So that's what I'm going to aim for, just somewhere generally in the middle of that triangle. That looks cool. Now let's space it out and see. I think, yeah, I'll just go off of that seam line. Sometimes you're going to have your ruler kind of in an awkward position. Stitch a short distance, stop in a seam line, and then reposition as needed. And just be very aware if it feels slippy, you know, to just be careful about stitching, and especially be careful about how much pressure you're putting on the Longarm against that ruler. You don't want to push it out of shape, out of position. Okay, now this time I'm going to come up, and it looks like over here I stopped a 1/4 inch away from that seam line, so that's what I'm going to go for. Go all the way up. And stopped with the edge of the foot right in line with that seam. And then let me see where that spaces out. Looks like it spaces out so that I'm a 1/4 inch from that seam line. Like I said, just made this up as I went along. You know, there's no real rhyme or reason. There's no real pattern to it. This is the fun thing that you can do with rulers. You get a quilt on your machine and you're not quite sure how to quilt it. Well, this is what you can do. You can just stick it on your machine and just start playing. And use the ruler, you know, the lines on your rulers, use the shape on your rulers, just to be creative and have some fun. You don't have to have some really complicated, well thought out plan before you get going. Okay, now I know I stopped a 1/4 inch from that edge. And it's really tricky when we get here close to the roll. This is where I roll up my quilt in the back bar. So I don't like having my hand to the front here. It's a little awkward, so it's just as soon as I can, I bring it around to the back. I'm going to just go in a short section here, then reposition my hand again. There we go. I'm pressing firmly down and then pulling the long arm towards me. That feels a lot better. Just be very aware when you are in an awkward position, you know, that the ruler can slip. Just be very, very aware of that. And if you have to, you know, stop and mark it. That could maybe help. Now this time, I think I'm going to bring that line all the way to the actual ditch, the actual seam line. And that's where I'm going to break thread. Right there, and stop. And whenever I bring my needle up, now the thing to keep in mind on a long arm like this, it does not lose tension. So you have to tug on that top thread, and that loosens it up enough so that you can pull it away. And I always pull it away like this, and then break the threads, and then tug to bring the bobbin thread up to the top. You don't want to leave the bobbin thread, whether you're on a home machine or a long arm. You don't ever want to leave that bobbin thread on the back. That's where you can't see it, and you can easily stitch through it and make a mess on your quilt. All right, so now I'm going to reposition, and I know over here I broke here and pulled up here, so I'm breaking here and pulling up on the opposite side. And again, make it up, do whatever you want. You don't have to do exactly the same thing as me. You know, it's really funny how I just kind of went for it and said, you know, it's okay. It can be totally random. And there's, you know, not really any exact spacing to these lines. It's just kind of how I felt like stitching this first 1/4 section. All right, there we go. Now I'm going to come down, stop with my foot when my foot lines up right with that seam. Now this time I do want to be a little careful, and I want to eyeball when the foot is a 1/2 inch. Let me measure that. And just put my ruler over that area I've done before and gauge how far apart. So I actually want to move this into the middle so that those lines are about, it's a 1/2 inch spacing between that line and the edge of my ruler foot. So that gives me 3/4 inch spacing. I'm a little off. Who cares? Let's keep going. Right across. That looks great. Now needle in the down position again. Stitch up. And let's see here. Hit that corner. Yep. So I am now a 1/4 inch away from that seam line. I'm going to move my body around so that I can stitch this last line. Hopefully that won't feel too uncomfortable. Yeah, when I get back here, you see how the back of that ruler foot can hit my fingers? It just feels really awkward. I'm going to shift things around here and come from it this angle. That feels much, much better. And I'm going to run right against that seam line once again. There we go. Okay, I'm super pleased with that. It looks really cool. And we're already getting that nice diagonal design coming in. I've got a couple thread breaks here, so I'm going to take a second to tie off and bury them. And then we're going to stitch a fun design all through this border. So I've decided to quilt a design called Loopy Lime. It's basically just big, giant loops. And all I need is just one single row of these through this area. So I'm going to stop there and kind of just come off into this border area. I know this will end up getting cut off after we trim up our blocks and connect them all together. Now I'm going to steer back up, and I'm going to shift and advance the quilt so that way I can stitch that nice loopy line across the top. So really simple, just need to unhook my long arm, just unlocking it, and I'm just giving it a little turn to bring it back down again. Now I tighten it back up, and we're back in business. And I think I'm going to come down here and connect with my loopy line. So here we go. I'm going to come in, Just think these loops are really nice. They're very soft. You can stitch it in a very easy continuous line through this whole area. Now I'm going to come up, make a nice big one. That looks great. And then through there. So there's really nothing to it. It's just a simple loopy line. Now if you find this challenging and you can't really think through it or stitch it freehand like this, then feel free to mark it on your quilt. That's a-okay. It's nice to vary the size and shape of the loop, so some of mine are quite a bit bigger than others, and that I think makes it look really nice. Now I'll come in. Now I've got to be careful. I've got to keep in mind that I'm going to run out of space on my frame. So I think I'll just stitch one more and dead end right there. So that is basically how I'm going to quilt over this entire block. So from here, I'm just going to advance the block through the frame and do the exact same thing. Broken lines through the center of the block to emphasize that beautiful diamond shape, and then loopy line in the background to stabilize that background area and add a nice little bit of texture too. Please feel free to stitch this block up a notch if you'd like to add more lines, if you'd like it to be actually more open and have less quilting. Both ways are perfectly fine. And I really hope that you'll be creative and stitch this however you think will look best. Make sure to share a photo of your quilt block. We now have a new Quilting Friends Club you can join. It's at quiltfriends.club. It is an extra membership fee if you'd like to join, but it is an area where you can share pictures, interact with other quilters, see how other quilters are doing in the Friendship Quilt Along, and be inspired as you quilt each block. So I hope that you'll come and check that out at quiltfriends.club. Until next time, let's go quilt.